in memory of two remarkable individuals, Carl Niebel and Roscoe Proctor, whose book collections formed the core of what became the Niebel-Proctor Marxist Library. Since our founding, the library has served as research center and as a community center, providing affordable meeting space for diverse community groups and continuing Roscoe's work with youth. This has been going on for over 2 decades. At the Institute for Critical Study of Society, under which this program is held, is also located at Niebel-Proctor Marxist Library, and it was formed to further the library's goal of preserving our written heritage, as well as supporting emerging struggles for social and gender equality and for socialism. The members of ICSS are active in different aspects of people's struggles in the Bay Area and globally. Some are affiliated with specific political parties and tendencies, others are not. We respect one another, but we do not necessarily agree on all issues. Accordingly, the opinions expressed in our lectures, workshops, and publications are those of the authors only. We are united, however, in our respect for the work of Karl Marx and our belief that his work will remain as important for the class struggles of the future as they have been in the past. As a group, we continue to draw inspiration from the work of Karl Marx, including his 11th thesis on Feuerbach. Quote, "The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it." I also recently came across an Engels quote of January 23rd, 1849. This is right after the failure of the European Revolution. And I thought it appropriate for today's session. It is now towards the end of that era of capitalism rather than at his time when it was the beginning. So there's contrast, but there are similarities. So here's the quote. "In Germany, in a very short time, they will even have to ask for our help. So just fight bravely on, my gracious masters of capital. We need you for the present. Here and there, we even need you as our rulers. You have to clear the vestiges of the Middle Ages and absolute monarchy out of our path. You have to annihilate patriarchalism. You have to carry out centralization. You have to convert more or less propertyless classes into genuine proletarians, into recruits for us by your factories and your commercial relationships. You must create for us the basis of the material means which the proletariat needs for the attainment of freedom. In recompense thereof, you shall be allowed to rule for a short time." That turned out to be 200 years.
Who's the author again?
Engels.
Thank you.
You shall be allowed to dictate your laws, which we have, to bask in the rays of the majesty you have created, to spread your banquets in the halls of the kings, and to take the beautiful princess to wife, Melania, and before that many others. But do not forget one thing, I added one thing, the hangman stands at the door. Okay, with this, I will go ahead and introduce our speaker who's introducing the subject, which is November and 2020 and beyond, the elections and what goes, or if the elections, etc., which is the discussion, open discussion today, but it is being led by Gene Ruyle. Gene is a Bay Area native who was born in Concord, moved to Berkeley, where he graduated from UC Berkeley before moving to the East Coast and earning his doctorate from Columbia University in anthropology and East Asian studies. He's now an emeritus professor of anthropology and Asian studies at Cal State Long Beach, and spends most of his time with the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library in Oakland. He is also president of the East Bay chapter of Veterans for Peace and a member of the Oscar Grant Committee Against Police Brutality and State Repression. As a scientific socialist in the tradition started by Marx and Engels, continued by Lenin and further developed by Stalin, Mao, Fidel, and others, including Xi Jinping, Gene is a firm believer in the Marxist principle of the unity of thought and practice, and has learned from his activism ranging from his congressional campaigns as with the Peace and Freedom Party to working with the native people of Los Angeles, the Gabrielino Tongva, in their successful struggle to save their sacred creation, a cremation center, Pavunga, located on the campus of Cal State Long Beach, and working with the family of Betty Perez, who was murdered by a Richmond police officer in 2014, and the ensuing cover-up. His real love, however, is the relationship between anthropology and Marxism. He has 8 grandchildren, but he still makes time for us. So with that, I'll hand it over to Sharon Rose, who's our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to moderate with the help of Alan. And Gene has a short, about 15, 20-minute presentation. We're very much looking forward to that. Gene, you could share your screen at any time. And after Gene speaks, I'm going to ask for clarification questions. And then if anyone has prepared anything they want to say, and after that, we'll just throw it open to general discussion. Gene, please go ahead.
Okay. I trust everybody can see this okay. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. Let me proceed. Before, during, and after November 2020, and partly of that, talking about November, I remember what happened 103 years ago, November 1917. But you'll recall that the October Revolution was preceded by the February Revolution. So it was a long revolutionary process. But I'm not, and I kind of think perhaps we're in that kind of era now. So
let me interrupt you. I want to make sure it's being recorded. The session is being recorded by somebody?
Yeah, it says this.
It is being recorded. Gene, hit your escape key.
Yes, we are recording.
Sorry about that.
Oh, not a problem, not a problem. But I would like to continue, and people can, it does interrupt my chain of thought, such as it is. But there's increasing concerns about what's going to happen before, during, and after the November election. So this gives us an opportunity to express our concern. And although I will introduce the topic, it is by no means I don't consider myself an expert. I think we have a whole room full of experts with us, and we wanted to learn what you people think about the what's happening here. And let me move forward here. And to start with, I'll put this information on there. My oldest granddaughter just turned 18, so I had to get their information on how to vote. And here's registertovote.ka.gov if you live in California, and in Orange, Alameda County, acvote.org MVP to find out if you're registered, where you and how you should vote, and so on. Okay, but as I was saying, we don't really have any experts. I tried to find an expert on the matter, And the only person I could come up with that made sense was the noted philosopher Yogi Berra, who said it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. And going on with that sentiment, we did have a number of suggestions about background reading, starting with the piece in Democracy Now! In early August. Someone suggested Bob Avakian, and then somebody suggested another thing by Bob Avakian. Then there's this interesting woman, Krystal, who speaks on the Hill, and I'll mention her. And then a good article on, suppose Trump tries to hijack the election. We need to get ready. And then RT America, which it's one of my go-to stations. But let me just get started. This is the Democracy Now! Program. It says, what if Trump refuses to accept a Biden victory? And a look at a look at how chaos could divide the election. And they interviewed this guy, Neil Gilman, who looked at, who brought a bunch of people who are experts together to say what would happen. And they looked at 4 different scenarios. Biden winning an election in a landslide, Trump winning in a landslide, and a couple of other where the election was very close or actually truly ambiguous. And the results were pretty intense in every scenario, except where the one where Biden won in a landscape, we ended up with severe dislocations, protests in the streets, crazy stories on the social media, and challenges went down to Inauguration Day, and I'm sure if Trump were elected, past them. So that's one of the things that alerts us to some of the things that can happen, and it's a good article mentioning a number of worthwhile things, and I urge people to watch that if they haven't already. I want to switch over a little bit to this program. Again, along with RT, it's one of my go-to programs, features Krystal Hill and this guy Seeger. She is a Democrat, he is a Republican, and they speak on different issues. And that the statement, if you don't settle for Biden, you ain't black, is not made by her, but I thought it was appropriate. But again, they talk about the program that is being put forth in a somewhat tongue-in manner, saying, showing Noam Chomsky, he's settling for Biden, why can't you? And Elizabeth Warren, she's settling for Biden, why can't you? And a number of other memes. I like the one with Ocasio, this effing B is voting for Biden, why can't you? And even, I put this one up because somebody mentioned Bob Avakian, he's settling for Biden, so why can't you? So that's one of the things that I find refreshing and one of the few humorous things about the upcoming election. A lot of the other things are not so humorous, and I put something on because we need to look at this. The election is not just national. It's not just happening here in the United States. It is of global significance. And I put this from RT America. He has a program on the post-COVID wars. And he says, where are places likely to break out? And he says it can be summed up in 3 words: China, China, and China. And I think that's very much the case, that the possibility of war with China is something that we really do have to think about. But on the other hand, as you may have gathered from my earlier comment on Xi Jinping, I think China may very well be the hope of the world because they do provide a model for dealing not only with coronavirus, but a series of a number of other things. And our media is so enamored of China bashing, both the Republicans and the Democrats, there were real concerns there, and I think we need to keep our eyes on that sort of thing. But the other thing that he talked about is TikTok. And when I saw that, really, TikTok? What would Archduke Ferdinand say? The chap whose murder helped lead to World War I. And I would say that if Archduke Ferdinand were alive today, he'd be rolling over in his grave with laughter. TikTok? That's what's going to start a war? And here's TikTok. As you can see, teenagers put goofy videos on there. People like to watch them. And I thought, I thought it couldn't get worse than Facebook, but apparently it has. But the interesting thing here is that China is striking back to protect TikTok of all things. And the real interest here is new China law prohibits sale of TikTok to US companies. Apparently they claim they're vital technologies there, what they don't want to lose. And I find that mind-boggling myself, but you don't. But things are not just humorous, as we know. Things are very serious because there are armed protesters out in the street. And you can see this, people not wearing masks and basically feeling they have their right to carry weapons includes their right not to wear masks, and they're continuing with that process in Portland and elsewhere. Again, another picture. So going back to this thing from my friend Krystal Ball there, I want to put up, she has, this program deals with Michael Moore, and I didn't have a text quote, so I put this up. But Michael Moore, as you will recall, is the person who accurately predicted a Trump victory in 2016. And he's at it again. Yeah, what does he say here? Well, sorry for another reality check, but Biden and, we're at it again in 2020. And he fears there will be a repeat. Biden and Trump were in a virtual tie in Minnesota, 47-47. In Michigan, where Biden had a big lead, Trump closed the gap to 4 points. Are you ready for a Trump victory? Are you mentally prepared to be outsmarted by Trump again? Do you find comfort in your certainty that there is no way Trump can win? Are you content with the trust you have placed in the DNC to pull this off? The Biden campaign just announced he'll be visiting a number of states, but not in Michigan. Sound familiar? I'm warning you almost 10 weeks in advance. The enthusiasm level for the 60 million Trump base is off the charts. For Joe, not so much. Don't leave it to the Democrats to get rid of Trump. You have to get rid of Trump. And we have to wake up every day and basically go back to one of my themes there. We need to settle for Biden, like it or not. So the last article I put up there was what can be done to safeguard the election process. And that's a pretty open question. I was pleased as a member of Veterans for Peace that he's urging veterans to urge active duty members of their duty to disobey unlawful orders. And I believe that many people will follow this advice. And another comrade, Nadia, most of you know her in San Francisco and a member of Vets for Peace, sent this out that really veterans have a vested stake in preserving the post office, which is going to be a vital thing during this election. Post office continues to be not only the largest employer of veterans, but people get their medical prescriptions from the post office, as do I, through Kaiser. So it's in the lifeline for people, and we need to preserve the post office. Moving forward down. The other thing I'd like to point out, some people have said, well, we need to call on the military to intervene. And other people say, no, it's the last thing we want to do, to call on the military to intervene. And I put this quote from General Mark Miley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And as an enlisted man, I've never had a hell of a lot of respect for officers in general and generals in particular. But this statement from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is relevant because he quite clearly says, I and every member of the armed forces take an oath to support and defend the Constitution. I will not follow unlawful orders. And he continues, we are a nation of laws. We must follow the rule of law and have done so with regard to past elections and will continue to do so in the future. I do not see the military as part of this process. This is the responsibility of Congress, the Supreme Court, and the components of the executive branch. In the event of a dispute over some aspect of the election, by law, the courts and Congress are required to resolve any disputes and not the military. I foresee no role for the armed forces during this process. We will not turn our backs on the Constitution. So coming from a general, I think that's a pretty good statement and worth listening to. Going from the general, what should the people be doing? And as a former member of the Peace and Freedom Party and someone who still respects their platform very highly, here's our statement. Socialism can only be brought about when we, the working class, unite and act as a body in our own interests. Our goals cannot be achieved by electoral means alone. We support mass organization, direct action, a militant labor movement, and establishment of alternative institutions in neighborhoods, workplaces, unions, and schools, and the armed forces everywhere. So that's an important element of how we're going to be organized. And in that vein, I'd just like to remind you of one presidential candidate who I expect to be voting for, Gloria La Riva, who is the presidential candidate and also of the Peace and Freedom Party and the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And I'm sure that organizations like PSL and ANSWER will be developing some kinds of strategy to deal with the upcoming election before and after. And finally, getting back to one of our favorite philosophers, Karl Marx, we'll remind you that the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. And with that, I will say, turn it back over to Sharon and say, it's your turn. And I will sign off on my screen share, or you can sign me off. So it's back to you, Sharon.
Thank you. Alan, could you unshare the screen?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm doing it.
Okay, so what I'd like to do first is call for any questions. I see Norma's hand up. Norma, do you have a question, a clarification question for Gene before we move on to general discussion?
I'd like to know whether there is to be inferred when people say things like war with China or other places that they talk about. Do they mean that the other side, China, is has some kind of equivalent engagement about having military engagement with the United States? I mean, otherwise it'd be what it will be. What it would be is a war against China, which I can understand.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Very briefly, Mao said that we have to protect ourselves from the imperialists. Yes. That should be
Okay, well,
clear.
that helps.
Okay, Yusuf, did you have your hand up?
Oh, yes, a clarification question. I believe Angela Davis also weighed in for voting for, is that correct?
I don't doubt it. I think pretty much.
She did.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Okay, so if there are no more clarification questions, did anyone prepare a statement more for anything formal that you wanted to share? And if not, we'll just open it up for general discussion. So anyone may raise their hand and I'll try to find you on the list and call on you. If you'd like to say anything. I don't have anyone in the.
Yes, this is Gary.
Gary, go ahead.
That whole quote by General Milley about the generals will respect the Constitution and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And and Milley makes reference to the other institutions, government institutions like the Congress, the Senate, the Supreme Court, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What's forgotten here is, Milley might say that the military will have nothing to do with this, but what's forgotten is that all those other institutions are powerful and relevant because there is a military with guns in the background.
So you mean that if the Supreme Court orders something, which army is going to make it happen, right?
Yeah, it's like General Jackson said about the banks in the 1820s. When he was the commander in chief of the armed force, he was the president, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the bank and the Supreme Court they found against this idea about the bank, which and President Jackson said, well, the Supreme Court made this decision. Now let them send an army to enforce it.
Right. Thank you, Gary. Richard Fallenbaum, you're next. Please unmute. Richard, you're still muted. There you go. No. Oh, you took your hand down.
I did it. I did it.
Oh, you did. Okay.
Well, yes.
Go ahead, Richard.
Well, I think as Marxists, we have to kind of look at these things and dialectically and turn them around and ask the opposite question. What would happen if Biden loses the election? Will he accept loss in the election? And of course, we know the answer to that because in 2016, the Democrats refused to accept the election. They and they continued for the last 4 years. So we're sure that through what they call the deep state or what we used to call the power elite, continue to oppose the election of Trump. And so we can be sure that the Democrats will do the same in the 60. Now, it will not be this kind of crude thing that is being projected onto Trump. They'll be the same. They'll continue the same tactics that they've used up to now. So the question is, and of course, the Biden is not merely somebody to settle for. He's a dangerous candidate. And the question is, do we have to settle for Trump? And I think that's a real question. It's a hard choice. It was a hard choice in 2016 whether to to support Trump against the warmonger Hillary Clinton. And, you know, Gene talks about the post-election, post-COVID wars. Of course, there are China, which Biden has supported, and there's also Russia, which is probably the more likely because it's seen as the more vulnerable. And the Democratic Party has been pushing for war with Russia for the last 4 years. And of course, when Biden gets elected, they'll have a free reign. So it's a hard situation. You know, we can vote for Gloria LaRiva or Kanye West, who I think is an interesting guy, and whoever else we want to write in. We actually want, you know, who I think we have to decide which candidate is more likely to get us into a war. And we've been fortunate in the last 4 years that we haven't started any new wars. But even if Trump gets reelected, there's no guarantee that there won't be another war. So anyway, that's my contribution at this point.
Okay, Richard Lieberman and then Raj.
Yeah, I think there's a qualitative difference between not accepting the results of the election, which the Democrats basically didn't, in that they constantly attacked Trump on various Russiagate, etc., and not stepping down and refusing to step down, which is what I think the question around Trump really is. Which brings up what the military guy said. What happens if Trump refuses to step down and neither the Congress or the judiciary do anything really about it? Then what does the army do? And I think that's a question I have, since they're, as the officer said, they're supposed to uphold the Constitution. So if all three branches of the government either deny the Constitution or just let things happen, what then? I think the other thing is, you know, in California, it's easy for us to vote for whomever we want to. Biden's going to win. So in a way, it's almost like a feel-good vote. I can come out saying I voted my principles, but nothing really got affected. The counter-revolution is proceeding, as you know, pursued by the Republicans. So I think, as someone here once said, a participant who's not here now, but I read something he wrote that he said the difference between Trump and Biden is Trump is a terminal cancer. Biden is one that may be treatable. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Raj, you're next.
Yeah, I think one thing is that this election is not connected to war with China or Russia. I think in either camp, that tendency towards this hegemonic shift that is taking place, where the number one hegemon, US and its allies, are now getting weak by their own internal maturing of capitalism, are threatened by the rise of a more successful hegemon, China. Whether it's socialist or not, that doesn't matter. That is not the debate issue. The issue is whether either one of them will put us more greater danger. And I don't think it's going to make much difference in that sense. So what is happening is more structurally is that the bourgeois democracy is deteriorating because capitalism has become oligarchic in the United States in particular, because everything is now a speculation. Why? Because this is how they make money. They get the surplus from China and elsewhere the investments are, and here surplus is not what is sufficient for them to make the kind of profit they make elsewhere. So they're decreasing the power of labor and they have successfully done it for the last 30 years, thanks to the investments in China and other places. So what is happening is a logical deconstruction of stable bourgeois democracy. And the question is, what is the working class going to do about it? Working class is at the weakest point, yet the struggles have begun on the streets. We are talking about it, but there are people fighting on the streets. So this is kind of like they are roughly the equivalent of Narodniks of Russia, which is pre-revolutionary. I mean, I don't mean to make it exact parallel. There are no exact parallels in history, but that's the situation. The question is, who is more dangerous for the working class to come to power? Which section of the imperialist class, which they both represent? Trump is a quixotic, is a strange guy, but he's the only guy who talks about working classes' material interests falsely, but he does talk about it. Biden only talks about hugs and kisses and love and all these kind of stuff, which are not a solution to the working class's problem. So it's quite likely for crisis of each camp not accepting the other. So the major question posed today should be, what are we to do? And as Richard has said, the Peace and Freedom Party is not on 50 state ballot. So you can vote here, but it's not going to make a difference. So that's the question. And I think we should address that question in this session.
There are two people who have already spoken. Oh, I'm going to call on someone who hasn't spoken yet and get back to the others. Anne.
Yeah, I'm kind of listening in. I'm in Texas, so I probably have a different understanding of things. One of the things that Gene said that I think is really important to consider is what do we owe the rest of the world as internationalists? What does the rest of the world want of us? Could be another way to phrase that. And in particular, what does the working class in the rest of the world want of us? Taking it down to a more human level. The other question in my mind is, what is the best tactic in terms of organizing the masses of workers who mainly don't vote? And in particular, what is the best tactic in terms of organizing African American and Latinx voters in a place like Texas, where, again, most do not vote in this current situation of struggle and pandemic? So I'm going to stop there, and I have more questions than answers.
Thank you. Norma, you're next, and then Yusuf.
It is derelict of us not to further the actions of the populace to register and vote, and to utilize the idea that safe states can well vote third party if they have anything available to do that with. And of course we do here, where 1/7 of the population and assume 1/7 of the voting populace live. Support for third party is obligatory by us. We are not to do that, to dismiss it as unimportant is altogether irresponsible. I'm sorry if it is perpetrated by any of us, that it's not important. It's important to support third party.
Thank you, Norma. Yusuf.
Okay, maybe partly in response to what the other friends and comrades have said. Well, if there's going to be a war with Russia or China, it will be a decision by the ruling class, and it really doesn't matter who is in power. I think that's a high-level decision. I think Trump is sufficiently worse in foreign policy, uncritically is supporting the most right-wing element in Israel. Such a thing will not in a different administration. So it does make some difference, but on a less, on a lower level. But lower levels are important when the power is great. Second, I do believe that Trump may challenge the result of the election. I don't know if he'll go as far as refusing to step down. That's, I think, a little unlikely, but I think he will tie it in court and so on and so forth if it is a close result. I think he is preparing right now for that possibility by saying this mail-in voting is fraud and so on and so forth. That's preparing the groundwork for a possible challenge. So I think it's important that Trump, we happen to have Biden. I'm not enamored of Biden, but the challenger to Trump, who happens to be Biden, win by a landslide. Now that comes to other elections. That's not, the presidential election is not the only thing on the ballot. There, I think one should decide in a case-to-case basis. Here in Connecticut, well, Connecticut, Biden is, Democrats are likely to win. Connecticut has always been a blue state, has in recent times been a complete blue state, even against the current in the rest of the nation. However, there is also the necessity of sending lower level Democrats a message that they cannot take the left and the working class for granted. Here, there is a Green Party challenge to the third congressional district in Connecticut. Rosa DeLauro, Henry Lohendorf has told this group that she's quite good in when it comes to like Social Security and so on and so forth, but she's also a warmonger, believes that defense spending, repeats that defense spending creates jobs, and that's her mantra. And when we go on behalf of labor, she welcomes us. If we go on behalf of peace, she doesn't. Now, we have a Green Party challenge to that. I think that sending her a message, she will probably win by a landslide anyway. She always does. But she needs a challenge. There was a Green Party, a peace candidate challenge during the war when there was the drums of in Afghanistan, and I think it was, she took it seriously and voted for some resolution requiring congressional oversight, something like that. So it pushed her a little bit on the peace camp. I think such, when it comes to lower, to other candidates, I think their third parties, in this, I'm talking about this election, we should decide this on a pragmatic case-by-case basis. We shouldn't shackle ourselves with dogma. But I believe, on the other hand, that it's important to create the foundations for left-wing third parties. And I appreciate the efforts of people in this group to that end. Okay.
Thank you, Joseph. I think your time is up. Thank you. I'm going to call on Mehmet, who hand up in the chat, and then Gene, and then Michael Kaufman. Go ahead, Mehmet.
Thank you. I think we are living in historic times. The reason being not Trump or Biden or elections from either one. It is that capitalism is in a very big crisis. I think the biggest crisis that we have all seen. So what do the capitalists do when they are faced with this crisis? That's what we need to look at. Wars may come, may not come, it doesn't matter, but wars are, in their mind, a solution to the crisis. So we need to understand what's coming up. I believe that the world capitalism is in a huge crisis, and due to this, they will have to solve or try to solve their problems like they've always tried to solve, is that attacking the working class all over the world, and this time the United States working class included. We are now on a road trip. We're going to be driving all the way United States, and let me tell you guys, it's scary. Wherever we have gone, Mike Pence and Trump banners are everywhere, flags are everywhere, and people are, seem to be very, very much supporting what Michael Moore has said that Gene has shared with us. So I don't want to take time in explaining that, but I'd like to go to saying, what could we do? So there are calls on the left for a united front of the left to get together and try to find a solution together. Because as I'm saying, I do see a fascism coming, and it's independent of Trump. It's independent of Biden. It is the state, it's the capitalism that can use Trump today, Biden tomorrow, Hillary Clinton the next day, Obama the other day. So in order to fight this, what are we doing? What I am saying is that the left needs to get together in a front, and we need to work not with the upper echelons of the Democratic Party, but with those people who want to show a reaction to this. And there is that movement that's out there. What are we doing? I'm hearing Green Party here. I'm hearing, the other progressive Democrats here and there. There is a big movement in DSA. The youth are trying to deal with this crisis, and they are flocking to DSA. I never knew about this, but in Idaho, there is a big chapter of DSA right in smack middle of Idaho. Where do you see this? We came across people putting banners across the Capitol building saying Black Lives Matter and, so on and so forth. So that's a great, what we are seeing is a class war that we have not seen in our lifetime, at least here in the United States. We need to act fast. We need to act as Marxists. We need to act as a defense against fascism that's coming. And I'm saying that if we were to unite, that is the only way that we are not going to be trampled upon. Thank you.
Thank you. I have 3 people in the queue, Gene, Michael, and Raj. So Gene?
And Gary.
And Gary, okay, thank you.
And Rich. And Rich.
Okay.
Okay, Michael has not spoken yet, so I suggest we hear from Michael, then put me after him.
Okay, sure, go ahead, Michael.
Thank you, can you hear me?
Yes.
I agree with much of what Mehmet just said. We are in historic times with the possibility of a fascist coup because of the economic crisis, because of the pandemic, and the disruption of normal life for millions and millions of people, because of evictions, because of lost jobs, and the anti-racist upsurge, but also, and this is new, the armed right-wing militia that have come to the fore in the last year or two, even though they've been around for a long time. I think there'll likely be a Biden win in the popular vote, but voter suppression, sabotaging the US mail, and fraudulent counting by Republican secretaries of state might throw the elections into the Congress, where each state gets one vote. That is much worse than the undemocratic Electoral College. I recommend, I put this in the chat, I recommend electoral-vote.com for looking at the numbers for the electoral vote. There may be a war with China, but there already is difficulties with China. Even though Japan has more than $1 trillion of US debt held, China is second largest with a tiny bit more than $1 trillion of US debt, but they are going to be getting rid of their US debt, going down by 10%, which means they're going to sell $100 billion of US treasuries, which will put a huge economic spike into the world economy. So war is not just bloody war, it's also economic war, it's also sanctions, it's also boycotts, which the Trump administration has done very strenuously against Iran, against Nicaragua, against Venezuela, etc. So, but there may be actual war in the South China Sea, where armed ships from both sides are challenging each other. I think one of the possibilities is a militia and border control and Department of Homeland Security takeover and coup, not necessarily just Trump, even though the Pentagon's military generals might follow the Constitution. There are many other forces that are not interested to. And lastly, I think we must work to unify all the progressive groups, but not under Democratic Party control. A third party is not very important, in my opinion, in this election, but we should support third parties in safe states like California. But ultimately, if there is the attempt at a DHS takeover and coup, then our only option is a general strike where everybody withholds their labor. Whether we can organize that fast enough to stop the armed militias from taking over, I don't know. And that's all I'll have to say. Sorry I spoke so long.
No, that's okay. Thank you. Gene is next in the queue.
Okay, well, thank you. I have a couple of things I wanted to respond to. First of all, as I told my little granddaughter in a grandfatherly way, that one of the things is she owns her vote. Nobody else owns her vote. She should not let anybody try to guilt trip her by saying, oh, you have to vote for X, Y, or Z, because it's her vote. She can exercise it if she wants to, and if she doesn't, that's her business and nobody else's. And I think that's something I would like to speak up for. That being said, I also want to say that, again, I'm voting for Gloria La Riva, and she is, I think, the only presidential candidate who has not come out with any kind of China bashing. PSL, Answer, Workers' World have always defended the People's Republic of China. And I think that's a very important step she's taken. Now, that being said, I don't know if anybody remembers Sculpt, the Search Committee for a Unified Left Ticket, which was actually back in the 1980s. And the reason nobody's heard of it is it totally failed. You know, as that's something that happens in the left. And that's one of the reasons I left Peace and Freedom to support Bernie. And just consider it. In 2016, there was Bernie, one person. 2018, the squad came on, and there were 4 or more people at various levels who were socialists, democratic socialists, and running, you know, as the squad. And they made a tremendous improvement. And this coming election, I think it's going to become much greater. And so, you know, I don't have a lot of money to spend, but the few financial resources that I do have are going to go to members of the squad in swing states because their activity is going to help Biden. And I can't give any money to Biden because I would throw up if I did. But I think it's worthwhile to support the insurgent members of the Democratic Party. And you have to understand the DNC hates them more than they hate third parties. So I'll just stop there. I'll probably have to say more on China later on, but I'll pause there.
Thank you, Gene. Next up is Raj, and Alan, I did put you in the queue.
Yeah, so thank you. I think one of the things about fascism is to break through military force, stranglehold and capture more redivision of the world. In other words, that's what form gave, that was fascist form came in order to militarize, in order to get territory, in order to establish colonies. So that kind of fascism we are not talking about. The danger, and I don't think Trump is fascist, so that's my opinion. The danger, the difference between these two major parties, and that's in terms of election, one of them will have won it and put the next president in the office. But the danger with Trump is this, that he's inciting white supremacy, okay, which is actually in the DNA of US capitalism, okay? This is the danger that he represents. He may not be doing it because he himself wants to do it, but in order to win and control, and also to meet his promise for a section of the white working class that has been hurt. So it all makes sense from his point of view to do that. The question is, now on the other hand, the Democrats are not that. They are useless for the working class. I mean, they don't do any more for working class either, but they don't incite that. So the question becomes, while the left builds its forces, hopefully it will not take 2 months, not even 2 years. It'll take a long time. We don't even know how to do it because the working class is fractured at the moment. So it has to learn new techniques of organizing, which it's learning, but it will take time. So the question becomes, in this election, it will not do for the left to just simply say, let's look at the long-term result if there is a present danger. I'm not sure there is, but I want to present this white supremacy and therefore the kind of militia, right-wing militia, which are white supremacy militia, what it will do, ultimately they will attack the left, okay? Because they are their real enemies. So the first march came after Trump came to power was Marxists out of Berkeley. I mean, that's us, okay? And I went to confront them in the park. And it turned out to be a pathetic bunch of 24 people who were spat upon and protected and taken out by the police. But that's not going to be the next time. They're already firing guns, right? You know, in Kenosha, Wisconsin, the 17-year-old killed, so on and so forth. And the police has infiltration of and tendency towards supporting this kind of thing. So I want the others to address this issue because it's a serious issue.
Thank you. Next is Gary.
I pass.
Okay, thank you. Rich and Kit. You have to unmute yourself.
I just unmuted.
Okay.
Okay, so there was a question that came up for me 4 years ago, yeah, 4.5 years ago, when Trump was coming in, you know, getting way more attention than I ever would have thought he would get, was why is the ruling class, in whatever way it expresses itself, allowing him to get, you know, in other words, as part of that, the media, the news media, the big stations that would, you know, just let him go on and on, not talk about what he was really saying, for instance. And then Facebook, and, you know, he could just buy ads and whatever. All these different forums or places to find some expression of the ruling class that were, if not supporting him directly, were absolutely not opposing him, or didn't seem to be opposing him. So, because this now why would the working class, excuse me, why would the ruling class think that there was a potential breakdown? Why would they go towards fascism? Are they so afraid? Well, they're not immediately afraid, I don't think, of us in an organized way. As we've said to ourselves many times, we're not ready. I mean, I've said we're not ready, but other people say in different ways. We're not united. The working class is all fractured apart, you know, jobs, blah, blah, blah. Endless ways we can see it, you know, attacks on the union, organized unions, everything. So, so what I'm saying is, I think the answer for that is that I think Mehmet spoke to this, Raj in some way. I agree with both, something that both of them said. Raj's was about the white supremacy organization as a mass movement there on the right. And then Mehmet's was more on the world, I think, if I remember right, the worldwide crisis of capitalism, not just the U.S., which we all think about. Now we're worried about the election in the U.S., and of course it affects everybody in the world with our military all over the world and all that. But I'm just saying that if the crisis that we don't talk about, really, I don't think understand that well, you know, exacerbated by COVID, the climate change, unemployment, which we don't talk about that much, but they say these days, without backing up very much, anything I've read, that it's worse than it was during the 29-30 period, you know, of when the Great Depression, when unemployment was very high and everybody knew it, soup lines everywhere. Now we just have homeless everywhere, not quite the same thing, or maybe just the same thing. So I'm just saying, if there's some objective thing under this, regardless of what Trump was, whether he wants fascism or not, I agree with that. Raj said,
Rich,
he might not be.
You've had more than
I'm winding up. Okay, so you get the drift of what I'm saying. I want the bottom line, the meat. You know, as they used to say, "Where's the meat? Where's the beef?" That would drive this, regardless of what people like me think or worry about, or you know, something that could drive us. And I would say the U.S. capitalism, leading capitalism, falling down, slipping against China rising is a part of that equation, I guess I'll call it.
Okay, thank you. The next person is Alan.
Just a quick comment. I want to call people's attention to the fact that this Trump phenomenon is an international phenomenon, and it's happening many places around the world, in Western Europe and Eastern Europe. And I'd go back to what Mehmet had said earlier. It's really a response to the capitalist crisis and 40 years of neoliberal politics with increasing inequality, globalization, precarity in the workforce, education for the rich, et cetera, a pandemic with no access to healthcare, an evictions crisis, which some of the news stories, I know people have been following them, have just been heartbreaking, of 40% of renters facing eviction. And I just have one quick statement I want to make about this. To me, the idea of supporting the Democratic Party and Biden as a way of stopping Trump, to me, is like pouring gasoline on a fire in an attempt to put it out, because it's precisely Democratic Party and moderate Republican, quote unquote, policies of Bush, Romney, McCain, et cetera, Clinton, and Obama that have spurred on this inequality, this financial bubble, the failure to provide access to healthcare. And I think something that Richard Fallenbaum pointed out earlier is also very important, which is the Democratic Party is very much pushing war with Russia. It's terrifying what's going on with them. And they're also pushing suppression of, red baiting in the tech sector, shutting down left-wing websites. So to me, this idea of supporting Biden to stop Trump is really, it's just a dead end, and it's really we have to really have an independent voice. So I'm with Gene. I'm supporting third-party politics, grassroots politics, and in safe state or not, we have to have an independent perspective against what's going on. I'd like to hear people's response to this.
Okay, is there anyone else who might want to speak who hasn't spoken? Okay, if not, I'm going to call on the only hand I see. Norma, you're on.
This whole thing about Trump, Jesus, it's frightening. The media and the whole machine of reporting reports on a terrible thing that Trump did. Oh, Trump did this terrible thing. And all these people are going, we want him, because there he is in the news again. There he is needing us to defend him. We're going to support him. And we don't get any opportunity to be heard. So we're going to keep on supporting him. And there they are saying a bad thing about him again. So we're going to support him more. I think the media reports are engendering, moment to moment, more and more enthusiastic vigor for supporting Trump. I think it's a total lost cause to think otherwise. I think there's no choice but to vote Biden, but, well, I won't, but because I don't have to worry about it here in California. Another point is listening to Gene's input of a piece from the Peace and Freedom Party platform reminds me that for a moment it was sounding like a DSA introductory statement, which I think is a good thing, that DSA sounds enough like a Peace and Freedom Party statement to be worth our consideration for what it's doing. I mean, the big thing about DSA is that it organizes to virtually or actually send people door to door, and that one-on-one contact, of course, is extremely valuable. But DSA, for all that it's DSA, is a good thing.
Thank you. So there are 3 people on the stack now: Gene, Michael, and Richard L. Gene, go ahead.
Okay, I'm unmuted and you can see me now. So yeah, I want to get back. I totally agree that the international working class must save the human race. And again, they won't, but to do so, they need a theory. You can't have a revolutionary party without revolutionary theory. And I just want to point out something that people don't seem to accept, the fact that If you look at the Chinese, the way they define themselves as a socialist society under the leadership of the dictatorship of the revolutionary democratic dictatorship of the workers and peasants of China, which they say is in essence the dictatorship of the proletariat. Now, this is hardcore Leninism. And who's the leader of who's the hardest core Leninist in China? But Xi Jinping. So I think people they're in denial about this simple fact. But I think it's an important thing to bear in mind that it is the leading role that China is going to play internationally, irrespective of who is elected. And along those lines, I think in terms of China-United States interaction, what's the role of the United States in this? I'll remind you that there's a particular contradiction in American society, the very foundation of American society, that is racism. And we need to think about the words of our, I think America's greatest spiritual leader, Martin Luther King, who said that we need to get on the right side of this world revolution. And to do that, we ourselves need a revolutionary revolution of values, because without that, we can't challenge racism, poverty, and militarism. And I think that's right. And I think it's important to take a closer look, because Martin Luther King was a democratic socialist. You look at his platform, guaranteed income, guaranteed jobs, the whole slew of things there. So again, I think we need to look at the contradictions within our own society and act accordingly. And also, again, understand the role of China in the world today, because it's going to be long and it's going to play a leading role, I think. And people, I think, need to bear that in mind. I'll stop.
Thank you, Gene. I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative and call on someone who hasn't spoken and then go back to the rest of the queue. So Judy Ann?
Yeah, I just wanted to add not a great philosophical message, but it's very interesting that these young DSA people are looking to join the Communist Party. Not necessarily socialist, but Communist Party. It kind of surprised me because of our personal experiences with some of the DSA people at the Marxist Library in Oakland. But it's according to the people who've joined, their understanding, their reading of literature, their watching what's going on, they really need to have a functioning Communist Party, not just Democratic Socialists. And I was surprised. Wanted to share it with you.
Thank you. Next is Michael.
Yes, I'm also interested in hearing from Sharon what she thinks. Thank you for facilitating, and also from Gary, who passed last time. I have, as regard to what Judy Ann said, DSA with 75,000 members has all kinds of people in it. There are some communists. There are a great many Trotskyists or people who used to be associated with Trotskyist movements, but there are also people who are on the central committees of their Democratic parties in their states and are working very hard to support Biden. It's a whole gamut of people. One of the most left factions in DSA, the Collective Power Network, along with another faction, the Bread and Roses faction, do talk about a mass working class party and do talk about leadership from Marxist Leninists, but there are many, many other DSA members. Finally, I have some very sad news. A comrade of ours who has actually spoken at Nebel Proctor, Kevin Zeese, has passed away. He and Margaret Flowers, if you remember, occupied the Venezuelan consulate in Washington, D.C., fighting directly against Trump's police. It's very sad news that the U.S. Peace Council that has announced that Kevin Zeese has passed. And I'll stop now.
Thank you. Next is Richard L.
Yeah. Well, Warren Buffett, the billionaire, once said that, of course, there's class war. His class is winning. And he was absolutely right, because the ruling classes are a class for themselves, unlike, unfortunately, the working class at this time. And I think it's instructive to see how they are actually winning the class war. And the way they're winning the class war is by totally deflecting from class. They've gone into nationalism, replacement theory, law and order, all the old reliable things, the culture wars too. It's so much harder on the left to try to tell people that a lot of your problems, most of your problems are systemic, capitalism. It's how this system works. It's much easier to create an other that you can blame. You don't really have to go delving into it much. You can just appeal to people's inner racism, let's say, or whatever. I mean, this country was founded on racism, on genocide and slavery. So in a way, it's a much easier task that the Republicans have. But my point is, they're very aware that there's class war, and their way of dealing with it is by creating all these other movements, all these other venues that, as other people have said, it is also an international movement. Nativism, white supremacy, those things. It's not just limited to the United States. It is happening all over. And in that matter, it's why I consider Trump infinitely more dangerous than a Biden, even though most of my life I've voted peace and freedom, and others. I have very rarely ever voted, maybe once, for a Democrat. But I consider at this moment, and of course living in California, again, it doesn't really matter that much. Trump has the capability of galvanizing a movement that is really growing. And to me, he represents, in that sense, much more of a danger. I think we know how the Democrats have failed, and in virtually all ways have also contributed to the mess we're in. But in this very moment, Trump to me represents more of a danger. Thanks. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Gene, you're up next.
Okay, thank you. You raised the topic of DSA, and I didn't mention it in my talk, but I've been a member of dues-paying member of DSA since its inception. And that's because I used to work with a NAM social school in LA, and I had an interesting conversation with Dorothy Healy. Many of you remember she was Southern California chair of the Communist Party during the McCarthy period. And she was a tough old bird, I have to say that much. And we talked about working inside the Democratic Party, and she said, and I said something about my reluctance to work with Democrats because they're scumbags. And she says, you don't work in the Democratic Party for your social context to get a date or anything like that. You do it because that's where the party power is, and you need to be there where the power is. And those words stuck with me. Not that I agreed with her, but it made me realize that, there are people who disagree with me, who are smarter than me, more committed with me, who've read more Lenin than I ever will, and so on. And we need to bear that in mind. And DSA more recently, I've been reluctant to get too involved with them because they're DSA. They still haven't shed their Harrington and Shackmanite roots. And that's just incidentally, it's not part of their DNA. As an anthropologist, I want to stress DNA is part of your genetic physical makeup. It's part of racists talk about DNA. As an anthropologist, we need to understand the distinction between racism, between race and culture. So it's just in passing. But again, I just want to say, I have to say that although I'm not impressed with DSA on a theoretical level, on a practical level, they're doing a hell of a lot of organizing. They're out there in the streets, and I'm sure they will be an important component of any resistance to Trump. And so I just wanted to say that on their behalf. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael asked me to say what I think. I think that we need to look more, well, let me say two things. One is that, you know, if we had a larger, stronger Marxist party, that party would be having its members in every other party to understand what's going on. So there are communists in the Democratic Party, but there should be communists in the Republican Party too. We should be everywhere trying to figure out what they're doing. Whoever is trying to organize the working class, so that we can figure out how to best do that ourselves. I think that the speculation about fascism is a little overblown. The ruling class does not want to rule in its most brutal way possible, which is the definition of the old definition of fascism. They don't want to do that. It becomes their last resort when their power is being shaken. Now, it's true that there is a crisis in capitalism. We're watching the beginning of the end of capitalism, and that's makes them very dangerous. But I think it's important to look at the rifts in the ruling class. They're not all the same, and it was notable to me that there were no old guard Republicans popping up at the Republican convention. There were no Bushes. Romney wasn't there, and a bunch of other people were notably absent. And I think they're trying to figure out, the ruling class is trying to figure out how to get what's going on in this country back on an even keel. They don't want to see the right-wing militias. They don't want to see any left-wing militias out there. And they would rather have labor peace and a restoration of what they view as the social agreement, the social pact with the ruling class, with the working class. So I think it's very important to look more at what the ruling class is actually doing and where they're putting their thumbs on the scale of this election, because many times in the past, when it comes down to the Democrat and Republican on the ticket, they don't care. They didn't care whether McCain or Obama was going to be president. Both were acceptable to them. And I'm not sure that that's the case this time, but I don't have any more specific examples, or I can't say any more about that, but I think it's an important question.
Gary on the stack.
Okay, Gary. So let's see. I think next was Gene.
I was on there.
Gene, Norma, and Gary.
Thank you.
And then me. Please me also.
I'm sorry, Raj, and then you. Go ahead, Gene.
I think Gene has already spoken right before you. So
I'm sorry. I got a little confused.
Should be moved to the bottom of the stack.
Norma, Gary,
Okay.
Raj, and Gene.
Please don't continue to derogate third-party voting. Support for it is essential. The fact that it doesn't win, that's because our mentality is adjusted to say, well, if it's not winning, it's not important. Please don't do that.
Okay, Gary.
Okay, first of all, if you go to the chat, You'll see my remarks on a recommended reading and why it should be paid attention to. So I'm not going to get into that now. I just want to say, Frank Lloyd Wright, the architect, once stated that the American continental plateau was tilted westward, and consequently everything weird comes sliding into California.
Yay for us.
And I think, and I think that especially goes double in terms of the left that we have in this state. Yes, it's a safe state for Biden, but yes, it's also important that it remain a safe state for the downvote in terms of all of the local elections and things like that. We've yet to explain why we have a Democratic majority in California, but we still have all of the backward social programs and social policies that we normally associate with Republicans. That's yet to be explained. And I think the way that you explain it is that the capitalist class has two wings of a one-party system. They can slide from one to the other, or they can fly from one to another. And that's, and it's no different in California than the most right-wing state in the union. And I think we ought to get over this idea that it's irresponsible to, to not pay attention to the Democratic Party and all the other forces that we need to go after in order to build something over time that counts. And by the way, yeah, we're not going to do it in November. In fact, I'll be damn surprised if we do it over the next decade. But we've got to do it.
Thank you, Gary. Raj.
Yeah, so I think if you look at the class structure in the United States, it's about capitalist class is minuscule, so much less than 1%. The middle class, which is small business and their families, constitute about 25% of the population, and 75% of the population is working class, including some very highly paid, but they're working class, like doctors and well-paid professionals. But so the well-paid professionals and the upper echelons of small business, and some of it in the middle also, like the middle peasant, right now is attracted to capitalists because they think their class interests are over there. But about 80% of the population interests are not with capitalist class anymore, okay? Because capitalist class used to deliver for them under Johnson onwards, I mean, before Johnson, from 45 onwards to about 75, the 30-year period, surplus wealth from US becoming the workshop of the world. Well, that's not true anymore. China is the workshop of the world, and China is developing its own capital. So now they bring surplus, but they don't want to share it. So there are two things. Either the working class could reform it so they share it more, okay? Which Bernie tried to do, but failed. I mean, clearly DNC whacked him away very easily and put in a guy who is promised he's not going to change anything. So both classes now, so therefore the Democrat parties become kind of bankrupt because 40% of the minorities are with them. I mean, the country's population is 40% minority, non-white, and they're mostly with them. There are some with the Republican Party, but very few, okay? So what Trump is trying to do is forge a new majority based on white identity, okay? It's class mixed, okay? But it's hoodwinking them into thinking that they're going to get some privilege. That's where the white supremacy comes in. So the question is, one party is bankrupt, the other has a strategy which may work. I mean, this is what Modi did in India. He created Hindu majority versus all the rest. And again, it's a non-class. It's a fight against class structure. I mean, a fight against those who uphold lower working class people. So this is our challenge. And there is a danger in what Trump is doing and what Richard Lipperman is also sensing, that this is a further pushback to the working class and leftists here. And not so much with Biden, it is another muddle which may again bring this right wing to power 4 years from now. So that's where we're stuck, it seems to me. And we do not yet have a strategy to fight it. By the way, I want to mention that another party that forms already over 100,000 members within a few days is the People's Party. I don't know what it is worth. It is just formed. And if anybody knows more about it, we should say so. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call a little bit out of order because some people haven't spoken as much. So I'm going to call on Anne and then Richard Fallenbaum and then go back to Gene and Norma. Anne, you're on.
Yeah, I think there's just a big elephant in the room in a way. And one of those questions is electoral politics legitimate politics in this country at this point? And I have to say, I think that it's incredibly important politics coming from Texas, because defending the legitimacy of that process, fighting against voter suppression, fighting to register Black and Latinx voters in this state is legitimate organizing. And I agree with everything that's being said about, we have one political party in this country and so forth and so on. That's absolutely correct. But I think we also have to defend the importance of elections, not as individual rights, but as collective rights. And that, I think, is critical, that we understand this as the expression. I mean, people can go on and on about why is everybody just falling into the Democratic Party? Well, it's because it's a collective act. And I just feel that very strongly. I feel that as a union person, and I feel that as somebody who lives in the state where the repression of the state is even impacting us on a local level in terms of state control of our local police, which is a real threat right now. And so I just, I think we have to talk about tactics as well as strategies in dealing with what might come out of this election in the aftermath.
Thank you. Richard Fallenbaum, you're up next. Oh, you took your hand down? Oh, do you want to speak?
I took his hand down, Richard.
Oh,
yeah, okay. Thank you.
It
takes me a little while to unmute, and sorry. Yeah, I think it was, Raj raised an interesting point. I want to repeat my insistence on looking at things dialectically, and we need to look beneath the surface, and things change dynamically. Like people's position may stay the same, but objectively, because of the changed situation, they may move actually into an opposite position. So interestingly enough, just a theoretical point. But Raj pointed out that Okay. The I have a friend here. You know that minorities are now 40% of the population, so-called minorities, which we call. And the Democratic Party is attempting to form a majority, not on a class basis, but on an ethnic basis, with the minority, the so-called minorities, and a sprinkling of middle-class white people, white minority there too. So, but you know, it's definitely, even though it's wrapped in a concern with racial justice, it's cynically, the Democratic Party uses that cynically, and it's attempting to form a coalition, not the New Deal coalition, but an anti-New Deal coalition based on ethnic identity. You know, I think we have to look at also this democratic socialism and the squad and everything critically too. And while we can say, you know, it's interesting that people have been drawn to democratic socialism, the DSA, but we know that democratic socialism is as phony in the end as all the other socialisms that have come down the pike. You know, eco-socialism, socialist humanism, national socialism in the 30s, the pseudo-socialism of the Nazi Party. The essence of democratic socialism is anti-socialism, is a hostility to China, the socialist countries. And, you know, it's interesting, you look at the squad, which are you know, the Democratic Party will be happy to get rid of them, but actually they're happy to use them too. You know, the AOC, you know, without changing her rhetoric, as Gene said, becomes a party stalwart, a stalwart of the reactionary Democratic Party. And she works with Biden. She worked on the Democratic Party platform that is a completely demagogic and phony platform, which is anti-working class. But there she is. And her consciousness didn't change. Her rhetoric didn't change. She still thinks of herself as a good person and a progressive person. But, you know, without examining her position, examining herself, she herself and ourselves, we don't realize she's become the opposite of what she thinks she is, and the same with the others. And the DSA will become, it's already sort of that. So you need a Marxist, you need a materialist look at these things to see what the essence of them is. So thank you. That's all I want to say right now.
Thank you. Mehmet was trying to get into the queue, so I'm going to let him speak, and then Gene and Norma.
Thank you, Sharon. It's important to understand, you know, when we are talking about fascism, what are we thinking? Are we thinking that one day we're going to wake up, open the curtains, and see SS troops marching on the street? No, no. That was fascism in 1938 in Germany. Things changed since 1938. We are not going to maybe not see those, but they are not the defining factors of fascism. We are seeing that the changes that are coming in waves, one after other. First of all, we are shocked, then we complain, then other things come, we forget about that, and that thing that shocked us becomes the norm. We stop talking about it while we are fighting, but step by step, what is changing is the system. What we have seen in 1938's fascism was that in the developed countries, in the capitalist countries, fascism came as a changing governance, while the neo-colonial countries experienced fascism as a systemic DNA level system. So what we are seeing is with this crisis, Trump comes and goes, Biden comes and goes, Obama comes and goes, but the things that they leave behind stay as the drops that fill the bucket of fascism. I don't hear anymore. I think Richard mentioned eco-socialism. I don't hear, you know, this was only 2 years ago, we were talking about the loss of privacy. I mean, everything on your phone, including the way you breathe as you are walking. Each time you take and give out breath, that is being recorded and is being transmitted. Nobody is talking about this anymore. So fascism, I think, is completely the merging of the private enterprise and the government or the state, and their full exhaustion of their power on the people, just so that the profits can still be made. And it is the system of monopoly. We are living in the monopoly stage of capitalism. So that brings its own system, which is fascism. So in order to understand, I mean, yes, Trump does incite the racists and everything, but Trump will get rid of them, or the system will get rid of them, you know, in one day. That's not it. But what will stay is the power of the corporations, monopolies, together with the state power on the working class, and also, of course, going to wars or not, or whatever. So that's, but in order to fight this, we do need a front of the left, maybe a united front, to get together. DSA, the Green Party, the, you know, PSL, the Peace and Freedom Party. Why are we still not understanding this, the biggest threat that we are facing right now? Thank you.
Thank you, Mehmet. Next is Gene, and then Norma.
Okay, well, this has been very good, and I appreciate everybody's comments, even when I may not agree with you totally. I think it's important to get all these things out and think about them. So I want to share with you something from Eric X. Lee. Very interesting guy. He was born in Shanghai during the Cultural Revolution. He got his BA from UC Berkeley, I think in economics, I'm not sure. He went on to be become a venture capitalist, one of the richest men in China. And also, I'm pretty sure he's also a member of the Communist Party of China. And one of the things he says is, that, you know, in China, you could become, you become part of the upper class, but you can never become part of the ruling class. And that is the Communist Party. He also said, you know, in United States, you can change parties whenever you want to. You can go from Democrat to Republican, Freedom, Green, and so forth. You can make anytime you want to change, you can change. Just, you know, call up the local registrar of voters. But you can't change policy. Policy in the United States has been consistently racist and imperialist. That's, I'm not going to say it's the DAA, it's part of what we are as Americans. We need to recognize that. But he says in China, you can't change your party. It's the Communist Party. There's also 6 or 7 other minor parties, but basically it's the Communist Party that runs things. You can't change that, but you can change policy. Because look at China over the past, since 1949. You go from Mao to Deng Xiaoping to Xi Jinping, major shifts in policy, but it's always the party. And I think that's important to bear in mind when we talk about China and the dictatorship of the proletariat. One other thing he wanted to say, he pointed out there, when people think, oh, well, it's a capitalist society. In China, wages have increased roughly 10% per year for the last 20 or 30 years. How much have they increased here in the United States or other capitalist or imperialist countries? Zip, I believe. So I think we need to bear some things in mind here when we talk about these things. And I will I have more to say later, but I'll stop there.
Okay, I see you, Raj. So Norma and then Raj.
Right. Mehmet, eco-socialism is being reclaimed by DSA for better or for worse. I mean, we all know what that means. I love Gerald Sanders declaiming against the adjectives or prefixes about what kind of socialism. Socialism is socialism, which I altogether agree with. And of course, I support communist struggle or communism as structure. The thing dear Mehmet reminded me of months and months ago is that in Venezuela, the reason there was such success of the socialist-ish or the communist-ish struggle in Venezuela was because there was a lot of support from the people who had been elected to office. And this kind of follows up on what I say all the time and what Ann Lewis was saying, that the elections are important. We need people who will help us out. I started to talk about that at the beginning of the meeting when I mentioned, when I asked the question if people are familiar with the, what do you call it, the deficit myth, because in her book, what she's telling us, and it seems to be novel in general for everybody in every place, that the deficit is what gets contributed into our coffers to be able to do the things that Congress decides we should do and get voted in. So what we need is people in office who will vote for the stuff we want done, and we can pay for it all. We can pay for school for everybody, healthcare for everybody, so on, housing for everybody, so forth, because we order it to be done. Now, people had trouble sometimes getting their head around that. And so I said, well, think about World War II. World War II came around, backed by the capitalists, of course, capitalists throughout the world, and in particular, based in the United States. But World War II came around, and the United States got put in a position where it had to fight it. So it just roused everybody, and it ordered these things be done, and it ordered those things be done. Build the bombers and everything, the warships. How did they pay for it? Nobody asked, because it's pushing a button on the computer or pushing a button someplace. And that's really hard to comprehend, because we think of deficit as debt that needs to be paid for, like our household debt, and it's the opposite of that. It is, we take the money from where it gets created in order to do the stuff that the government, us, decide needs to be done. And that's what the big success had been in Venezuela, as Mehmet reminded me, or informed me, actually. I didn't think about it at the time. But there you go.
Thank you. Raj, you're next.
Yeah, just quick comments. During Second World War, Communist Party in the US and around the world supported Soviet Union, and I think rightly so, because they were threatened. They're completely threatened for, the whole country was threatened for existence. Today, is that not the case with China? And how can Chinese Communist Party be so separated from Chinese capitalist class, which itself it creates? And so there are three classes in China. I don't want to make this a discussion about China, but US Marxists need to think. Do you think you will have any influence in the working class of USA who has lost their jobs going to China by talking about the virtues of Chairman Xi? Whereas, in fact, the right is taking the working class here. Shouldn't our focus be on the working class here rather than defend China? China is capable of defending itself. There's no way the United States can militarily get entangled with China, and then Russia will come in, we'll all die. That's not going to happen. They're going to try economic stranglehold of China. And I'm against that. China, whatever its form, US has no right to do it. So we should oppose any kind of strangling of any country, whether it be Iran, China, Russia, or any country. But the idea that you represent a system of governance in another country who is not threatened for its life by war, and where the working class has lost its jobs, is it a wise strategy? That's my question.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else in the queue. We're approaching the end of this meeting. It's 12:26. And since it's pretty much been an open discussion, we usually transition after 12:30 to a more open, free for all discussion, for lack of a better word. And we're not really going to transition to that right now. I would like to maybe let Gene have the last word, since he made the presentation. And then I personally have to leave in a few minutes, but I would, we could leave the Zoom on for other people who want to hang out. So, Gene?
Ask for money.
Oh, yes, and we have to do our pitch for money too.
Gene will do it.
Richard is usually the one, or Gene.
Oh, yeah.
Let Gene speak politically first.
Yeah,
though.
yeah. Go ahead.
Okay,
Gene.
let me speak, then we'll go
want.
to. Well, well, first of all, I hope Richard has put the donation material onto the chat room so people can see it there, I hope. And I hope Richard has done that. And remind you, the next week we have Roger Harris speaking on Trump and fascism. I forget exactly what it was. The specter of fascism hangs over America or something. But anyway, that's also going to be very interesting, I think, worthwhile, and I'm glad we're doing it. After that, we still need to figure things out. But that's good. But yeah, I appreciate everybody's comments on this. And I did want, and I also think that we stopped recording the program at 12:30, but then we leave the Zoom open for individual discussion. So just bear that in mind. So this recording should stop very close after 12 o'clock.
Would you, or maybe Sharon, let us know when to stop the recording, please?
Okay, let's just let Gene say what he wants to say, and then you could go ahead and stop it.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I could go on for hours. And Ross and I have discussed China enough, and people have heard enough about that. Everybody knows our respective opinions. I just want to say something about eco-socialism. Our comrade Gerald had some worthwhile things to say on that. But again, I read the foundational documents of eco-socialism, the Eco-Socialist Manifesto and so forth, and I cannot endorse that, because in there it says we reject both industrial capitalism and the industrial state socialism in the Soviet Union. Each have been equally disastrous for the environment. And basically, I can't sign that. I can't sign on to that.
Right, yes.
We do have like Gerald, I consider myself a scientific socialism, as I said, in the tradition begun by Marx and Engels, continued by Lenin, and then further developed by Stalin, Mao, Deng Xiaoping, as well as Xi Jinping. I know many people disagree with that, but that's where I'm coming from. And again, I think we're getting close to 12:30. So Richard, did you want to say anything about the financial situation? Because people should give money to the ICSS, and want to note that we do also urge people to give people money to the NPML, the Marxist Library, but funds you donate to the Marxist Library stay there. They don't bounce over to us. So bear that in mind and act accordingly. And Richard, did you want to say anything? Or I guess we can end the recording and move on to, I'll give it back to you, Sharon.
Okay, thank you. Richard, I don't know if he may not be in front of his computer. We wanted you, Richard, we wanted you to put the addresses in the chat, your address. You can also go to our website and there's a way to donate on the website. But I guess Richard's not at the moment in front of his computer, so hopefully he'll come back. Could I just turn this over to you, Alan, for the rest of the free-flowing discussion? Because I'm
going to stop the recording now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Sharon.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, @yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.